Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Mr. V's Camping Chair Chat. My name is Mr. V. I'm currently sat in a camping chair in a cupboard under the stairs. Why? Well, why not? But also, Harry Potter vibes in it. We have just had the 2024 Azerbaijan Grand Prix around the streets of Baku City, and my god, what a Grand Prix it was! That was pretty good. That was pretty good television, nail-biting stuff. I literally couldn't leave the sofa. I drank 2 massive black coffees immediately before the formation lap. And I was just like, it's Baku. There'll be a safety car. There'll be a red flag. There'll be a lull in the pit stop strategy when I can use the bot. Is that a beeping sound? I don't know what that was. I was bursting. I was attached to that sofa, bursting, but I couldn't go anywhere. I think I ruptured my spleen, my bladder. I don't know what I ruptured. I ruptured something, but it was worth it. What a race. Long story short, we had Piastri versus Leclerc at the front, fighting for the lead, throw in a bit of Perez, exciting stuff, throw in a bit of Sainz. Well, we'll get onto that in a little bit. As always, we're going to cover a bit of the news stories surrounding the weekend. Not actually going to cover any, weekly news this time. We're just going to start on the Grand Prix weekend itself with qualifying. If you are watching this podcast and you haven't watched either qualifying or the race, and you kind of think, oh, maybe I should, you should watch those. They are good. I actually didn't see qualifying live on Saturday. I was driving hundreds of miles across the entire UK. But I watched the replay. I would recommend it. So, we kind of kick off qualifying. Seems normal. We had 3 red flags in FP1 on Friday, so there's always a chance that something weird is going to happen in Baku. Q1 seems normal until, what's this? Lando Norris is in the drop zone, and then, what's this? A yellow flag in Sector 3, and what's this? Norris isn't finishing his lap. He's ducking into the pits. Norris, championship title contender, out in Q1. P17 in qualifying. That's not good. Some may say suboptimal. You really want to be getting your championship contenders onto the front row. Onto the front row would be good. P17 is, I don't even know what number row that is. 8? Suboptimal. For those of you who are watching this live and were kind of unsure what that yellow flag was for, because it only came out for a couple seconds, enough to screw Lando Norris, but then it just went away again. It was Esteban Ocon earlier on his final lap of Q1, slammed into the wall right at the start of the lap in Baku, and was actually just trundling around relatively slowly to get back to the pits of a damaged car. They didn't throw the yellow flag anywhere else on the circuit, but for some reason, they threw a yellow flag in Sector 3 just as Norris was getting to Ocon. If they hadn't done that, it would have cost Norris a little bit of time getting round Ocon, I want to say, considering where he met him. But when it's yellows, you have to slow considerably, otherwise you're going to get a penalty. Completely screwed Lando Norris. Obviously, he just pulled out the lap and just didn't qualify. Yeah, rough. Weirdly, not the only strange thing to happen in qualifying. On Saturday evening, we also got a confirmation Pierre Gasly was disqualified from qualifying for illegal fuel flow, a term which we've heard before in Formula 1. You can't pump too much fuel into the engine. There's a limit of how much fuel you can pump into the engine per second, fuel flow rate. If you go over that, immediate disqualification. Quite a hot topic for an unknown reason, nothing to do with Ferrari. Turns out that Pierre Gasly's car was pumping too much fuel. The funniest part of this is Alpine came out and said, oh yeah, that actually made us slower. It was mistaken, it made us slower. Nice one, Alpine, doing Alpine things. Love to see it. Pierre Gasly disqualified, but actually he still started P18 just behind Norris because multiple other people started from the pit lane. Esteban Ocon also got a pit lane start. He got a penalty for changing a power unit. Not because he was over the limit of power units. No. The ruling goes, changing a power unit without informing the FIA. What? So it's either they changed it and you have to fill out some paperwork saying we're going from power unit 001 to power unit 002, and they just forgot to file the paperwork, or for some reason, Alpine thought they were sly and could change an entire engine in their car, and no one from the FIA would check. Turns out they did check, and they found out it was a different engine, and so Ocon got a penalty and started from the pit lane. If you're Alpine and you think that you can change an entire arse engine, you can have all mechanics in your garage change an engine and no one's going to notice, no. That's not how that works. So yeah, Ocon pit lane start, Gasly disqualified, but puts him to the back of the grid, so actually P18. Lewis Hamilton also pit lane start for changing components, both engine and chassis components, to change his setup. So actually Norris starts P15, not as bad as P17, but still not good. Turns out though that McLaren is quite quick, so he will make some places in the race. Because of his P15 start, an interesting fact came out on Saturday evening, which is that Lando Norris has gained exactly 0 laps. Positions on the opening lap of any race this year. He has never gone forwards on the opening lap. It's kind of hard to do because he's obviously qualified on pole several times. You can't gain a position from pole. And if you start P2 next to Max Verstappen, it's tough. Obviously, this rhetoric of Lando Norris not having great opening laps, backed up by the numbers, it would seem, because he's never gone forwards on an opening lap. He's broken that curse, though. All he had to do was start P15, surrounded by Stake F1 team Kick Saubers and an Alpine, and it turns out he can overtake people. I think that brings us nicely to the race. And the majority of this podcast is going to be discussing various things that happened in this race, because various things did happen in this race. Quite big things, actually. Some quite interesting things. So yeah, at the start, on lap 1, Norris gains a position on lap 1 for the first time in 2024. Congratulations, Lando Norris. As I said, it's not always that easy to do when you start at or very near the front. We always get these statistics and it's like, you know, Lance Stroll has the most overtakes in a season. Well, yeah, because Lance Stroll regularly underqualifies his car, and so he just gets it back to where it's meant to be during the race. So, like, statistics need to be taken in context. If you can hear a screaming child, there is a screaming child, seemingly just behind that window. If you can't hear a screaming child, probably shouldn't have pointed that out. These statistics need to be taken with some context, and so Lando Norris has been a very strong qualifier this year, and so it's hard to gain positions from the front. But you would like to think you would gain 1 or 2, you know, maybe start second and go up to first on the opening lap, or start P3 and go to P2. Nope, never. This is the first time, so good for him. It turns out it wasn't just the opening lap. He gained quite a few positions in this race. We'll talk about the final classification at the end because it was a bit tumultuous. But talking through some other storylines for this race. So we talked about last time, Kevin Magnussen received a one race ban after the Italian Grand Prix for his collision with Pierre Gasly, which he is serving now in Baku. It was not appealed, nothing like that. He was not here, replaced by Haas's signing for next year. Oliver Behrman makes perfect sense. He's driving for them next year. Why not get a bit of an internship in, do a bit of an early job interview, learn the car a bit, learn the team a bit. Makes perfect sense. He was in for Kevin Magnussen. I talked about last time, would he be using his race number for next year? No, he was using number 50, which is one of the Haas test numbers. I mean, that makes sense. That's what they have allocated to them anyway this year. Fair enough. Oliver Behrman was in a track, and I said we shouldn't expect too much from Behrman this time. He obviously went in for Ferrari in Jeddah and scored some points. Excellente. Well done, Oliver. Haas is not as quick as Ferrari, don't know if you've noticed that. And historically, Haas is not quick in Baku. Very bad track for them. They haven't scored here in 7 years. So I was saying don't expect much from him. He just sort of has to drive around, learn the team, learn the car a bit, good experience. He actually had a very good race. He did finish P10, I want to say. Which brings me to my point. I noticed this weekend we seem to be having what I like to call the NFL statistics team has taken over the Formula One broadcast. If any of you regularly watch the NFL, you'll know what I mean. The statistics in that sport can often be incredibly niche and incredibly complicated and incredibly obscure. You know, other sports, they'll flash up stats and it's like, oh, he's on track to become the number 6 all-time goal scorer for his team. When you watch the NFL, it's like, he's on track to become the number 4 highest point-scoring left-hand side receiver born in the first half of June to play for a Texas-based team. Okay, why are you tracking this? That's quite specific. I noticed this weekend because we had a number of stats rolled out in the warm-up to the race on Sunday. One of them being Ollie Behrman had the opportunity to become the first driver to ever score points for 2 different teams in his first 2 races. Which is an interesting stat. I can't lie, it caught my attention. But then you kind of think about it and it's like, well, yeah, because normally when someone starts in Formula 1, they drive for one team for more than one race. So yeah, it's a bizarre statistic, honestly. It's really weird to get your start in Formula 1 on just a one-off race. You often get like people substitute in for one race. Think of Hulkenberg doing multiple subs between sort of like 2020 and 2021, and things like Jensen Button subbing in for Alonso at Monaco, whatever year that was. But normally you'd get a more experienced driver to substitute in to do just a single race. It's weird to have a rookie substitute in to do a single race, and so incredibly hard to get the opportunity to drive for 2 teams for your first 2 races and have a point scoring opportunity both of those times. So Ollie Behrman had the opportunity to be the first person to do this, and I haven't looked it up, but I can't imagine many people have had the opportunity to get that statistic. Spoilers, he did score points, and so well done, Ollie Behrman. First driver ever to score points for both Ferrari and Haas in their first 2 races. Will we ever see that repeated? Not anytime soon. Some other statistics that caught my eye this weekend were Franco Colapinto, first Argentine driver to score points since Carlos Reutemann retired in 1986, I want to say. That's a long time. Obviously, Argentina are a country with a rich motorsport history. One of the greatest of all time, Juan Manuel Fangio, Argentine driver, they kind of like originated the sport in a lot of ways. Argentina's been there from the very start, and we had an Argentine Grand Prix for several years in the early days of Formula 1. Similar to places like Italy, bro fell off. Like, where's Argentina been recently? It's nice. It's nice to have an Argentine driver back in there. We've got a lot of Brazilian representation in motorsport. Where's the Argentinians? So yeah, Colapinto bringing points back to Argentina for the first time in almost 40 years. GG. And another bizarre stat that they rolled out was Charles Leclerc is the second Ferrari driver to score 4 consecutive pole positions at a single venue. Okay. And it gets to a point when these statistics are so incredibly niche that there's really not that many drivers who could have ever secured them. You have to drive for Ferrari for at least 4 seasons at a time when Ferrari has a quick car. It doesn't leave that many drivers, so who could possibly be competing for that? I'm going to go ahead and say it's Michael Schumacher was the first person to ever do this. Why roll out a statistic? That's like saying that Kevin Magnussen is the most Danish driver to ever drive for Haas. It's like, well, yeah. He's got no competition in this field. It's not exactly sport, is it? Anyway, I just thought it was interesting that we seem to be getting this massive wave of incredibly niche statistics. And you know me, I love some bizarre, unhelpful statistics. Why not give me a random fact during the middle of a Formula 1 race? But why now? What's happened? Who have you hired in the Formula 1 media team who's pumping these facts out? And who's tracking these? What interns, Formula 1 interns, are they making you track these stats now? What have they done to you? I'm sorry. I would like to clarify again, this sounds like I'm complaining. I'm not complaining. I think it makes the sport more interesting. It makes it just a little bit more silly. Formula 1 is a very silly sport. Why not roll out the silly stats? So go for it. Thank you, Formula 1. Very cool. Don't know where you're getting these from, but keep up the good work. I like it. Makes my job easier because now I just have to repeat them in a silly voice and everyone says, ooh, funny Formula One numbers, man. Ha ha ha. Right, I think the podcast kind of went off the rails. I'm just going to go back to the race reports. So, Azerbaijan Grand Prix, we get off the line. Normally, Azerbaijan is a bit of a crashy track. It's a very safety car prone track and a very red flag prone track because normally if you crash in Baku, it's a big one. As I said, 3 red flags in P1 alone. So you kind of expect there to be something opening lap. It turns out that thing was Lance Stroll sending it up the inside of Yuki Tsunoda a little bit at turn 4. Was there space to go up the inside? Probably not. Honestly, was he fully in control of his car? Didn't really look like it, to be honest. I don't actually think he got a penalty. He did retire, and also he punctured a massive hole in Yuki Tsunoda's right side pod. Yuki Tsunoda immediately slows down, gets overtaken by loads of people, and also retires. So that's kind of a bit sad. It's particularly sad for Tsunoda, who now has retired 2 races in a row through no particular fault of his own. It's also kind of a shame for the whole Ricciardo and potentially Liam Lawson storyline, because with all the drivers in the Red Bull sphere, there's obviously lots of discussion of potentially people moving up to Red Bull, potentially Perez moving out of Red Bull, potentially Liam Lawson coming into RB, who stays at RB, does Ricciardo keep his job, does he get promoted, does he get fired, etc, etc. It's quite hard to evaluate these things when half the drivers in Red Bull Racing and RB are just DNFing every race. Is Daniel Ricciardo currently keeping pace with Yuki? I don't know, because Yuki Tsunoda is never driving. So it's a shame, because I would like to see how Ricciardo's doing to be able to evaluate, Liam Lawson's potential chances of getting in, or Ricciardo's chances of moving up. It's a shame. It's a shame. I want to see cars driving, crashing is part of sport, is part of motorsport, should I say. It's not part of golf. If there's a crash in golf, something's gone terribly wrong. Crashing is a part of motorsport, though, and in a way, crashing does make motorsport more interesting. I'm not willing for anyone to crash, but if a season had no crashes, would I be sad? Probably, yes. So crashing is a part of motorsport, but if it's going to be Yuki Tsunoda every single race, I didn't sign up for this. Please, can we stop doing that? Please crash into someone else. Also a race which seems to be marked by lots of teams being caught out by their long run pace. As I said, 3 red flags in first practice means that no team was able to do their full test plan, and it seems almost every team gave up on doing their long run analysis, doing their high fuel load running to see how they run on hard tires for 25 laps at once. And so no one knew how to set up their car for the race, for a long run. And so particularly the first into this race, tons of cars just completely off in their race pace. Ollie Behrman just had no race pace first stint. He was dropping down quite a lot. Oscar Piastri also, who was in probably the fastest car, was starting the race P2, cooked his tyres first stint because McLaren didn't know what they were doing. The only team who even put a set of hards on to their car in practice was Mercedes. Only one team even tried driving on hards. That's crazy. So first stint in this race, lots of people just sort of drifting up and down the timing table because everyone's race pace was messed up, because everyone's setup was messed up. It kind of all settled down after the first round of pit stops, and lots of people then started to settle into roughly where they were going to finish. It's a race that didn't have many overtakes, but had many potential overtakes, and many battles that just carried on for the entire race. As I said, Oscar Piastri started strong, but started to lose out on pace during the first stint, and so Charles Leclerc gained quite a significant lead. I think he was about 5 or 6 seconds ahead by the time of the first pit stops. It was looking good for Leclerc. He likes Baku. He's qualified on pole here 4 times in a row, and it's the second Ferrari driver to ever do that, so he clearly likes Baku. And it looked like he was just running away with it, but then everyone pits around about lap 15 to 20. Suddenly Oscar Piastri's faster again. He starts to come back and overtakes Charles Leclerc. And I made a note of this because this was not an ordinary overtake. Overtakes in Baku typically happen down into turn 1. The straight is Depends how you define a straight. That's a philosophical question we should answer at another time. But the straight is somewhere in the region of 2 to 2.2 kilometers here at Baku. Long, that means. So you get an enormous draft effect down this main straight, then opening DRS for the last part of it into turn 1. Very easy to catch up to someone, get alongside them, make a lunge down into the relatively heavy braking turn 1, which is a obviously 90-degree left. That's where you would expect an overtake, and so if I just told you that Oscar Piastri overtook Charles Leclerc into turn 1 on lap 20, that doesn't sound too crazy. Watch the video. My man did not lunge. My man started 3 or 4 car lengths back, a length behind that should not be possible, realistically, to make a lunge, but guided by the hands of some deity, that orange McLaren stopped like no motor vehicle has ever or should ever be able to decelerate. I don't know how the hell he got that thing stopped, but Oscar Piastri just lunged from miles back. He was still in sector 2. He was in the castle section. My guy started lunging from the main straight of Monza. He started lunging 2 weeks ago. He was so far back. He did the biggest lunge I've ever seen in my life, stuck it in the inside of turn 1, somehow stopped that car, made the corner, little kiss on the barrier, a couple centimeters away, took the lead of the race. What are you using for brake discs, McLaren? What have you made them out of? Vibranium? Unobtainium? Uranium? Probably don't do that one. I don't think that would be that good. Either McLaren have invented some ultra material to put into their brake discs, or Piastri just went to stamp on it with the biggest, most hulking, throbbing, get your mind out the gutter, massive left leg, get your mind out the gutter, just kicked that throttle pedal down into the sewer system of Baku. I've never seen a lunge like that. Mental stuff. Charles Leclerc clearly had never seen a lunge like that either. Fully was not expecting him to do that, and so had no defense. Even Oscar Piastri wasn't expecting himself to do that, because in the cooldown room, he said, yeah, I came in a bit late and I was expecting to crash. It's like, come on, man. Didn't crash, got past him, took the lead, and then Charles Leclerc had 31 attempts. He did this on lap 20. They had 31 laps until the end. Charles Leclerc had 31 attempts to dive bomb him back into turn 1. He attempted it many times. Couldn't do it. Oscar Piastri holds the lead. GG. But honestly, I watched that move and I was just like, just stop the race. That is deserving of the win. Mental lunge. People will make all, Ricciardo lost the late breakers, say that Lewis Hamilton is fantastic on the brakes. Give that trophy to Oscar Piastri. Do it now. That was fantastic. Love to see it. Love to see a racing like that. Some other fights that were happening. We had Sergio Perez kind of keeping onto the back of Leclerc and Piastri, sitting in third. At times, he would get up close, get into the DRS of Leclerc. Looked like maybe he was going to get round Leclerc, but never really had a serious attempt at it. We then also had in around about 6th and 7th, they kind of varied on other people pitted, Norris and Verstappen. So Norris on a different strategy, started obviously way outside the points, was going long, along with Alex Albon, who had interesting qualifying, going long through the race, got up around the region of Verstappen, Verstappen was not a happy guy. We did not get Max Verstappen this weekend. We got minimum Verstappen. Min Verstappen. He was just not happy, complaining about the front end of the car, saying he wouldn't bite, complaining about the rear end of the car, saying there's no grip, saying there's no traction. He was not a happy guy, and his pace was just kind of lacking. Like, he just had a quiet race in a way, pace-wise. It wasn't quiet event-wise. So yeah, Norris and Verstappen, two championship contenders, still somehow ended up battling each other, despite the fact that one of them started P15 and one of them started at the front but just had no pace, and they kind of just met in the middle. Still almost crashed into each other. I guess when you're in a title battle with someone and you hear all this news story about them and you have several races early in the season where you're side by side and battling for the win, the mental side of that it takes a while for that to die out. So despite the fact that they were fighting for like P6, these two almost crashed into each other several times with some very scrappy racing, which is also fantastic. It would have just been the stupidest storyline ever, but hey-ho, it was fun to watch. We had Verstappen on the radio saying, "My brakes aren't working," immediately before trying to dive bomb Norris at the inside of turn 1. Like, you'd love to see it, just silly Formula 1. As I was saying, another car going along was also Alex Albon. I guess, slight backtrack to qualifying. Good news for Franco Colapinto and his bid to prove himself as a Formula 1 capable driver out-qualifies Alex Albon. Alex Albon famously just never gets out-qualified by his less than fantastic Williams teammates. Was out-qualified by Franco Colapinto in his second ever race. With a caveat, because both of them got into Q3, fantastic for Williams, but kind of not unexpected. Williams has historically been a very low drag car with a very good top speed, and Baku is just a drag race. So their car's always suited to here. You would expect them to do well. Both cars into Q3, fantastic. Doing their second runs in Q3, no one told Alex's garage crew apparently, because he was just sat there and then clearly had the call to go out to get his final run done because he wasn't going to have enough time to get round to the line, but the garage crew wasn't ready. I don't know how it's possible, but Alex Albon gets the call to go. The cooling fans are still in his airbox, there's still people with their hands on the cars, and he just speeds out the garage, almost rips the legs off one or two mechanics, which is horrendous. Very glad that no one was hurt then. A couple of people had to like jump out of the way of the tyres. Those tyres are big and they are sticky. If your leg is touching one when it starts to spin, you don't have that leg anymore. Sorry to tell you. So really glad that no one got caught up in that. But also just drove out of the pits with the cooling pack still in his main air vent above his head. You can't do that. Obviously, you're not allowed to drive around with that. He noticed, or was told on the radio, got to the pit exit, like outside of the pits, stopped, pulled it out himself, like reached up behind his head, yanked this thing out, and then was just, he stopped by some marshals, and he was clearly, you could see him on TV, shouting out the side of the car to these marshals saying, "Can you take this?" And it's like, what? What situation is this? Got to a point where he just sort of chucked it. I think the marshals did then come and grab it afterwards, and then carried on, and weirdly, almost actually still got round. He missed out on the flag in Q3 by only about 2 seconds. Almost made it round and said it was a pretty good install lap, and so may have done quite a fast Q3 time. But didn't get to do that. Colapinto then jumps him to out-qualify him in his second ever race. Excelente job, Franco Colapinto. I do feel like Albon would have out-qualified him if he had done his qualifying normally, but things happen. This happened. Colapinto leaps Albon. They're 1-1 in qualifying head-to-heads. Probably feels weird for Alex Albon. He's not used to anyone being anywhere near him in that second Williams. In the race then, Williams decide to split the strategies on their cars and send Alex to go long, starting on the set of hards, very similar to Lando Norris. Alex Albon, well known for making a go-long strategy work, so it makes perfect sense, and he did make it work. It worked pretty well. He was right up at the top and holding up quite a few key people right at the front of the race. Decent pace on those hard tyres. And actually, Colapinto may have out-qualified him. Alex Albon got his own back, finished in front. Colapinto did still score points on his second ever Formula 1 race. Nice to see it. As I said before, Ollie Behrman also scored points to get his weird statistic. If the race finished 2 laps earlier though, neither of these things would have been true. So, I'm sure you would have seen Carlos Sainz and Sergio Perez crashed into each other on the second to last lap, or the penultimate lap. Let's talk about that. Oscar Piastri was leading this race since lap 20, Charles Leclerc in P2 that whole time as well. Made several overtake attempts, got ahead a couple of times, but basically was in P2 for 30 laps. Sergio Perez was also in P3, only about 1 second behind Leclerc for most of that time. These three therefore looked a shoo-in for the podium, with quite a gap then down to Sainz in P4. But in the last sort of 10 laps before the end, Sainz finds a decent amount of pace. You could also say that Leclerc and Piastri and Perez are all slowing each other down by constantly trying to overtake each other. bit of column A, bit of column B. Sainz manages to catch up to the front three, and so probably about 6 laps before the end, Sainz is now also only 1 lap behind Perez. Not 1 lap, 1 second behind Perez, starts also trying to overtake him. We therefore have 4 cars only separated on track by 3 or 4 seconds who really could finish in any order, and they all know this, so they're all fighting hard. The 2 Ferraris and Perez start to get into a number of, skirmishes, overtake attempts. Piastri manages to capitalize on this and kind of pull out in front. Good for him. Which leaves Leclerc, then Perez, then Sainz all making random dive bombs and overtake attempts on each other. 2 laps before the end, Carlos Sainz overtakes Sergio Perez to take 3rd place. Sergio Perez stays with him though, through turn 1 and through turn 2 is right on the back of Sainz, obviously trying to make a move down into turn 3 to get 3rd place back. Gets a good run out of turn 2. Carlos Sainz doesn't get a fantastic run, wheel spin or something, is kind of slow. Red Bull starts to catch him. They are therefore alongside. Sergio Perez's front wheels were next to Carlos Sainz's rear wheels, but not fully alongside. Carlos Sainz is still the lead car in this situation. Neither of them really do anything. They both drive out the corner and go straight, but then after a couple of seconds, they just collide, collect each other, slam into the wall on the left-hand side. The question is, whose fault is this? This situation obviously sparked immediately lots and lots of discussion online. Lots of people saying it's Perez's fault, lots of people saying it's Sainz's fault. The people on the Perez camp who are blaming Sainz say that Sainz, the car ahead, turned across him, swerved across the road, cut across the left, didn't give Perez enough space, squeezed into the wall, and therefore they crashed. The people on the Sainz camp say that Sergio Perez is the car behind and just drove into Sainz. Sainz is going in a straight line. You have to avoid a car that's going in a straight line, or just you have to avoid a car full stop. And Perez didn't do that and just drove into the side of his car. Sort of both of these are true, and also sort of neither of these are true. I'm going to put it down to a racing incident in this specific situation. You have to consider that Baku, very fast track, they were a decent way away from turn 2, so pretty high speed already, and obviously that section is just completely walled in. There's absolutely nothing at the side of the track. There's no runoff, it's just wall. If this was a slower situation, I would put the blame on Perez. Relatively fundamental rule in racing is don't drive into the car in front of you. Pretty basic rule. You would think would be easy to follow. Don't drive into the car in front of you. When you're in a car, you look forwards, and so the person who's in front can't really see the car behind. You've got mirrors and stuff, but it's much harder to see the car behind. The person behind has a really good view of the car in front of them, and also the onus is on them to make the overtake safely. You can't just get up to the back of a guy, slam into the back of him and say, "Whoa, he drove into me," and then get awarded loads of points, because otherwise no one would ever do a race. They would just slam into the car ahead and then expect to be crowned Formula 1 World Champion. So the onus is always on the car behind to pass safely. In a slower situation on a different track, I would say this is Perez's fault, because he's the car behind. He sees where Sainz is going, he sees his trajectory, and doesn't adjust accordingly. He didn't turn into Sainz, but he also didn't turn away from Sainz, which is really his responsibility, allowing the two cars to crash and both get wiped out and DNF. But considering where they were between turn 2 and turn 3 in Baku, the speed they were going, and the fact there's a massive wall there, I can understand the human reflex on Perez not to want to swerve his car into a wall at high speeds. It's all well and good saying you have to avoid the car ahead, but when you're in a gap that you weren't expecting to close, which is now closing, into a wall, your body won't allow you to get out of the way of that. You're a racing driver, you're obviously not going to let go of the throttle. You're just going to leave your car there, which is exactly what Perez did, just held his steering wheel solid. The two cars collide. I'm going to put it down to a racing incident. I don't think Sainz did anything wrong. he's well in his right to block off the car behind, break the toe, take whatever line he wants as long as he's not swerving. And he didn't swerve. He did the most slight of left-hand turns I've ever seen in my life. I definitely wouldn't put any blame on Sainz, but it all happened fast enough. And it all happened in a kind of non-malicious and stupid enough way, with both cars just driving straight and just sort of playing chicken, that I'm going to put it on a racing instant. Perez could have reacted, but also it's understandable that he didn't. Yeah. The blame is tilted to the Perez side, but it's not Perez's fault. Racing instant, and just before I started recording this, the FIA agrees. There's going to be lots of discussion about this incident anyway, because it has implications for title battles and also maybe Perez's future. It's going to be a hot topic of discussion. I'm sure it's going to be covered to death, but Racing Instant is both the FIA verdict and much, much more importantly, the Mr. V verdict. So, Perez and Sainz both DNF the race, which means George Russell, who was running in 5th place with no one anywhere near him, gets to the line and is told that he has to go to the podium because he's in P3. He was as surprised as us. He was like, what the hell? He was asking, he went up to Charles Leclerc and he's like, what happened? What happened to your teammate? Charles Leclerc's like, I don't know. George Russell had no idea. He said he saw a cloud of carbon fiber, but he doesn't know if that's Carlos Sainz or, like, you know, Franco Colapinto or Valtteri Bottas. I was trying not to say someone too cliche because, you know, let's be impartial here. George Russell inherits P3. Lando Norris, who is running P6, inherits P4. And Max Verstappen behind him inherits P5. It's kind of the same difference, so it doesn't really change the title battle between those two particularly. It does have some interesting implications for Max Verstappen picking up a couple more points than he would have in relation to Leclerc and Piastri at the very front, who are going to get 1 and 2 anyway. As I was saying, the other implication of this is we get a couple of interesting facts that we wouldn't have otherwise got. Franco Colapinto does score points in his second ever Formula 1 race and does become the first Argentine driver to score points since sometime in the 80s. And also, Ollie Behrman does become the first driver to ever score points for 2 different teams in his first 2 races. Neither of these would have been true without this crash, because basically Nico Hülkenberg overtook both of them and said, interesting statistics, nah mate, never heard of them, I'm finishing P10. So Nico Hülkenberg was in front of both of them. Colapinto and Behrman were in 11th and 12th. Then they crashed, everyone got promoted up, and also Nico Hülkenberg got hit by a significant amount of debris from this crash, damaged his car, and so he dropped behind all of them, finishes P11. In a way, you could say that this crash is the most interesting way this race could have ended, while also being the least controversial for the championship battle. Bear with me, I'm cooking here. Because neither Sainz nor Perez are anywhere near championship contention. Mathematically they are, but they're not. But it's still 2 front-running teams, so it has constructors' implications, but only a little bit. And it gives us all these nice little storylines. It, in a way, is a really nice conclusion to this race without having any stupid, unhelpful rhetorics at the end of the season. Because imagine if this was Sainz and Norris in this crash. And this happens and Norris was running P5, let's say. And then we get to the final race and Norris actually does lose the championship by like 10 points. And people are like, whoa, if Sainz hadn't turned into him in Baku. We're not going to get any of that, thankfully, because neither Sainz nor Perez are challenging for this title. So we get this interesting event at the end of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix that can kind of just exist, and it doesn't really matter who is in the crash, and all the main players in our title battles are still there. I'm going to talk about that in a second, but just wanted to mention one thing on the theme of weird facts. I thought I had spotted another weird fact when I looked at the score sheet for this, because we had 4 British drivers scoring points this race, and I was like, that's not that common to see so many drivers from one nationality all scoring points. When was the last time? Has it ever happened before that we got 4 British drivers in the top 10? Yes, it has in the 2024 Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, also when Ollie Behrman subbed in. So I was like, oh, fair enough. The time before that was in 1968 in the French Grand Prix with Surtees, Stewart, Elford and Courage. So we had a 56-year wait to get 4 British drivers again, and then we had to wait just a few months. Basically, whenever you put Ollie Behrman in, he scores points. Haas, pay attention. He's on a 100% streak. Do not mess this up. Don't mess this up, guys. Okay. So yeah, that's just a fun fact for all you British bias enjoyers. We do love to see loads and loads of British drivers. Not biased, just British, mate. And so just to round out this podcast with a couple more numbers, I thought we should head back to Championship Watch. Or Championship... What do I call it? Championship something. It's going to be Championship Watch, unless I forget again. You know what I mean? We talk about who might win the championship and the numbers and stuff. So, Max Verstappen obviously is still leading the championship. 313 following Azerbaijan. Norris, second place, 254. Does gain on Verstappen this race, but only by 3 points, picking up a 4th with the fastest lap. I was just checking if he did get the fastest lap. He picks up a 4th with the fastest lap, which is 13 points to Verstappen's 5th place, which is 10. So he gains on him, yes, but he doesn't gain on him enough. I said about this before. Norris had to gain about 8 points per race average to actually catch Verstappen. Did not do that. So while he finished better than him, yes, he's actually fallen further away from the possibility of winning the championship. He now is 59 points behind with 7 races remaining and 3 sprints, but that's not, we're just not counting that. Ignoring sprints, he needs to score 8.4 races per points per weekend. So there's more points available on the sprint weekend, but it's still 8.4 points per weekend, which has gone up because he scored points, but we now have less races. Not fantastic for Norris. Charles Leclerc, people were talking about him catching Norris, has not caught Norris, is now on 235 in 3rd place. Gets closer, but is still in 3rd place. Is absolutely still mathematically possible for the championship. One person who was not talked about after Italy, but should be talked about, is Oscar Piastri. The pastry boy, the patisserie man, is now, and still is, 4th place in the Drivers' Championship, 222 points, so only 13 behind Charles Leclerc, and actually only 32 behind his teammate Lando Norris, but scored 25 this weekend. An interesting fact that I checked just before starting this, if the remaining 7 races finish with the exact same classification as this one, so Oscar Piastri P1, then Leclerc, then Russell, then Lando Norris with the fastest lap, and then Max Verstappen in P5, the Drivers' Champion will not be Charles Leclerc. He will finish on 361. It will also not be Lando Norris, who will finish behind Leclerc on 345. It will also not be Max Verstappen, who will finish on 383, but behind Oscar Piastri, who will finish the season 397, the Drivers' Champion. I didn't check, but I'm pretty sure we've never had 8 races in a row with the same top 5, with the same person getting the fastest lap every time. That seems unlikely. It seems incredibly, incredibly unlikely. But not impossible. But very, very unlikely. I should add, very unlikely. But not impossible. So if you're Oscar Piastri, all you need to do is win every race from now on, make sure that Max Verstappen is still finishing sort of P5-ish and Lando's back there with him. It's possible. It's possible. And honestly, if you had to ask me who is the best driver in Formula 1 right now, not like one lap pace or anything, but consistency, all-round package, and this is backed up by numbers, you could say Oscar Piastri. He's had some good luck, yes, but also he's had a little bit of bad luck, and still he is the highest point scorer through the European leg of the championship in the last 7 races. He is the championship winner if you just count those races, he's doing a good job. Definitely looks like he could win another race before the end of the year, if not multiple. With Charles Leclerc also looking very good, looking like those two are now going to be challenging for the wins with Norris and Verstappen potentially behind them. We've got a bizarre driver's title battle with 4 drivers who have all swapped in form. It's kind of reminiscent of things like 2010 or 2012, where it's just meant the permutations of what could happen is just insane. It's going to be interesting. That's the only thing I can guarantee. Just don't look away. That's the only advice I can give. It's going to be whatever happens, the end of the season is going to be great. The season so far has been great. This is a banger, guys. 2024, whoever wrote the script for this, absolutely cooked. Gonna be a banger for the rest of the season. Singapore next weekend, almost always a good race in Singapore. Also gonna be a banger, I have no doubt about that. Talking about championships, McLaren is now winning the Constructors' Championship, kind of surprising no one. They are the best car. Technically, they are 20 points clear now, which is a decent haul, actually. Helped on by the fact that both Perez and Sainz DNF'd. It would have been less than 20 points, but good for them. That can still change. McLaren still looks like the fastest car, but you never know. You never know. Ferrari is good in Singapore. Mercedes is good in Singapore, so they might, disrupt some things and get in the way, slow some people down. Red Bull is not good in Singapore, but maybe they figured out why, and now they're the best team in Singapore. Probably not, but you never know. One final thing, one technical point I'll add, and I'm not going to analyze it too much because this is primarily an audio-only platform. McLaren flexi wings. We've talked about them many, many times throughout this year. A kind of new kind of flexi wing, though, the McLaren secret DRS. We've heard about double DRS, particularly on the Red Bull, in the last 2 years. One thing I noticed during the race, and I saw a couple other people picking up on this on Twitter, following the race as well. You should follow Miss V on Twitter, by the way. McLaren, I spotted a sort of secret DRS thing they got going on. So the DRS flap in the center of their rear wing obviously opens kind of, if you know what I mean, from the front. Like the front goes up, so it sits more flat, and it has a gap between that and the lower element of the rear wing. That's the sort of DRS slot. So the front edge of this twisting element is forwards, and it tilts up from there. We've heard about flexi rings primarily on the front wing, where it kind of bends down, the back of it bends downwards to become more flat, and we've also heard about flexi rear wings, again, where the back bends down to become more flat and therefore produce less drag. I noticed when we were looking at Oscar Piastri's rear view camera, when Charles Leclerc was fighting him, the front of the DRS element on that McLaren is bending up under very high speeds. This was happening, you could really notice it just towards the end of the Baku Straight when they were over 200 miles an hour. The front of the element was bending upwards while the DRS is closed, while it's not activated, but effectively to open up the DRS flap a little bit. Obviously nowhere near as much as actually pressing the DRS button, but front sort of catches the wind, gets twisted back, and opens a bit of a slit, which is definitely going to reduce the drag of your car. That's going to stall out the rear wing and make you absolutely rapid in a straight line. And funnily enough, McLaren was absolutely rapid in a straight line around Baku. So that's a thing that definitely the other team's going to be looking into and looking if they need to copy. But also, we could start to see some teams complaining to the FIA, and potentially trying to get a technical clarification in to get this banned, because there's been all the stuff about flexi wings and you can't have your wing bend down, and they do all the load tests to see does it bend in that way. A wing bending up is kind of harder to test and is a bit of new grounds, or is noticeable for the first time. That's one to watch on the technical side of Formula 1. Very interesting, very nice little development by McLaren. That we love to see it. May not be the safest thing ever. Who knows? Not going to pass any judgments on that. Just keep an eye out. Keep an eye out. It probably won't be as helpful in Singapore, I would imagine, because it seems to be most prevalent at tracks where they run a shallow wing, like Monza, like Baku. But you could see it coming into play again in places like Vegas towards the end of the year. Could be interesting. Keep an eye out for that. Drivers' Championship is hot. Constructors' Championship is hot. Formula 1 is hot. Our new rookies appear to be hot. Performance-wise, okay? This is not a hot or not podcast. I haven't started that yet. We'll do it next year if there's demand for it. But anyway, stick around. We'll be back this time next week to cover the Singapore Grand Prix. Where will the camping chair be next? I don't know. Potentially outside this time, but it keeps raining. So that's why I'm taking cover under here. You can find out if you watch this next time on YouTube, and I will let you know if you're also listening on audio-only platforms. If you are, give it a 5-star rating on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, whatever other podcast player you may be using. If you're just using the RSS link, I guess you can't rate it, that won't get back to me, but just do it anyway. Just do it just to be nice. Give the video a thumbs up on YouTube. Leave a comment saying, lovely shirt, Mr. V. Shame the person wearing it is so ugly. Until next time, I've been Mr. V. Enjoy your week. Enjoy watching cars go vroom vroom. I'll see you later.